Hey, good morning. Welcome to Church Online. Man, I'm so excited to be with you. Want to welcome those of you, especially for whom this kind of whole online church thing or church in general is new, or maybe you're new to our church, to Upper Room. Want to welcome all of you logging in right now. Some of you are on your own. Some of you are with the people you're stuck with. But this is one of those beautiful chances in the week to not be on our own, to be together. And so our prayer for this, in as long as this season lasts, that something like this allows us that weekly gathering to be together, to be with God, to recognize that God has things for us, especially in a season like this, to speak to us. But we are able to experience that from each other, and even chatting and welcoming each other as you do. Don't be afraid to use that chat function that's there as you're logging in. Well, this is, as you know, this is kind of a day-to-day thing. And so one of the things you're going to notice today is that I'm on my own up here. And we're going to be led by worship, by Kurt in worship from his home. And we're kind of trying to stay as separate as possible, just because we're trying to pay attention and obey what our government and what we're part of a family of churches, what the leaders of our denomination are instructing us to do, and yet at the same time take advantage of every opportunity we have using technology and all that to be together. And so this is one of those things that's week to week, and we appreciate your patience with us if you've been with us for a couple of weeks figuring out the tech and all of that. And as we said to you, if you lose the feed for a second or whatever, just stay with us. We'll be back on as soon as we can. But I just wanted to welcome you today. We're going to have a chance to pray together, to look into God's Word together, to sing together. And the song that Kurt's going to open with today is actually a song that somebody wrote in reflection on what has commonly been called the Lord's Prayer, or for some of you, the Our Father. And maybe you grew up in a tradition where this was something you prayed a lot in your home or every week at church, or maybe in the school you were in a bit, or maybe you're not even familiar with the words. This is actually a beautiful chance to just listen and, in a sense, pray it together. You may not know how the song goes, but just listen, and it's an opening really into to coming to God in prayer, praying the way that Jesus taught us to pray. And we can think of no better way to start the service. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kurt now, who's going to lead us as we sing.
Good morning, church. It's so good to be with you this morning in your living rooms. Thanks for welcoming me. This is my living room. It's interesting times that we're living in right now. And with all the things that are going on around us and the government mandating many things and canceling many other things, one thing I want to remind us, church, the government cannot cancel is singing. And the government cannot cancel God's church and God's children choosing to worship Him in the middle of hard times and trials. And so that's what we're going to do this morning. And so I want to start with a song that's taken from Scripture that reminds us that as His children, that we are bound together, not by who governs us or what laws are passed or who's in power, but we are bound together by His love that is greater than anything we could be facing today. So let's sing this and remind our hearts of this morning. Out the window words are composing, not a note is out of tune or out of place. To the meadow and stare at the flowers, better dressed than any girl on her wedding day. So why should I worry? So why should I worry? Why do I freak out? God knows what I need. You know what I need. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. The kingdom of the heavens is now advancing. The kingdom of the heavens is now advancing. Invade my heart, invade this broken town. The kingdom of the heavens is buried treasure. Would you sell yourself to buy the ones you found? Two things you told me. Two things you told me. That you are strong and you love me. Yes, you do. Yes, you love me. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Our God in heaven, hallowed be thy name above all names. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us weary sinners, and keep us far from our vices, and deliver us from these prisons. Yeah. Two things you told me. Two things you told me. That you are strong and you love me. Yes, you love me. Two things you told me. That you are strong and you love me. Yes, you love me. Cause you are higher than, 'cause you are higher than the mountains that I face. You are stronger than the power of the grave. You are constant in the trial and the shame. This one thing remains one thing. This one thing remains. 'Cause your love never fails and never leaves, never runs out on me. 'Cause your love never fails and never leaves, never runs out on me. 'Cause your love never fails and never leaves, never runs out on me. Your love. Sing it together, on and on it goes. 'Cause on and on and on and on it goes. For it overwhelms and satisfies my soul. And I never ever have to be afraid. This one thing remains. Oh, this one thing remains. 'Cause your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. 'Cause your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. 'Cause your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love is promised to us in death and in life. In death, in life, I'm confident and covered by the power of your great love. My debt is paid, my debt is paid. There is nothing that can separate my heart from your great love. Sing it out. Your love never fails and never gives up, and never runs out on me. 'Cause your love never fails and never gives up, and never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, and never runs out on me. Your love. And on it goes. And on and on and on it goes. For it overwhelms and satisfies my soul. And I never ever have to be afraid. This one thing remains one thing. This one thing remains. 'Cause your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. 'Cause your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails and never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love. Your love is never ending. Your love is never failing. It's your love. It's your love. Yes, it's your love. And God, we thank you for your love, God, that you pour out on us in this moment, always, yesterday, today, and forever. Your love is reliable and dependable. And God, we thank you that your love is constantly pursuing us, God, even when we turn our backs on you, even in our rebellion, your love chases after us. And God, I thank you for that. God, we thank you. We declare today that you are good. Even in the midst of trials and storms, when the waves are crashing into our boats, God, you are still good. And so, Lord, we just want to remind our hearts of that this morning, that you will never leave us, you will never forsake us. In Jesus Christ's precious name we pray. Amen. Now, kids and youth, Pastor Melissa and Pastor Kate have told us and reminded me that you guys know this one. And so I'm hoping you will sing it loud in your houses, that you'll drown out the adults in the room. So let's sing this song together. King of my heart. Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. Sing it out, you know it. 'Cause you are good. Oh, 'cause you are good. Good. Oh, 'cause you are good. Good. Oh, 'cause you are good. Good. And let the King be the wind inside my sail, maker in the waves. Oh, he's my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he's my song. 'Cause you are good, good. Oh, 'cause you are good, good. Oh, 'cause you are good, good. Oh, 'cause you are good, good. Oh. Let's sing this, church. 'Cause you're never gonna let me down. And you're never gonna let me down. And you're never gonna let me down. And you're never gonna let me down. Sing it out, come on now. 'Cause you're never gonna let me down. 'Cause you're never gonna let me down. 'Cause you're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. 'Cause you are good, good. Oh, 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 continue to sing, you are good. 'Cause you're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. 'Cause you're never gonna let me down. 'Cause you are good. Sing out. Good. Oh, 'cause you are good. Good. Oh, 'cause you are good. Good. Oh, 'cause you are good. Good. Oh. Yes, God, we declare that this morning. And God, some of us, for being honest, the foundation, God, has crumbled from beneath our feet. And God, I pray, Lord, that in these times, as we've been reminded of who you are, God, that we would build our lives on the solid rock of Jesus Christ. When the wind and the waves come, God, that we can stand firm on your promises. You are unwavering, God. You are the day today if we do not change like shifting shadows. God, you have plans to prosper us and not to harm us. Because you are good. We thank you, God, for this time when we can sing and declare these things together as your church. God, be with VJ now as he speaks and opens up your word. God, speak mightily through him, God, we pray. And your spirit would interpret your word into our hearts, we pray. We love you, God. We love to worship you. And we love to hear from you, God. So speak, we pray. In Christ Jesus' precious name. Amen. Amen, church. Amen.
Thanks so much, Kurt. So good to be reminded of all of those truths at times like this. That's why we sing. That's why we sing over and over. We sing to our hearts. We sing to each other. We sing to God, and it reminds us of what's true in a season where we need to be, where we need to remember that. At this point, before we kind of jump into today's message, I want to just a message for you. If you got kids at home and you're not sure how the next little bit is going to go, there's a lesson for them. You can go to upperroom.ca and just click the little message there that says that we're online, and that'll take you to kind of the page for today's service. And at the bottom there's a PDF with a kids lesson, some activities and things like that. And so maybe one of the older kids, if you've got multiple in your home, can do that. One of the parents, if there's two of you there, or it's something you can do after today's message just to follow up with, so that for those of you that have kids at home, that this is a family experience that you're enabled to continue to kind of journey in together. But for this morning, I wanted to begin by asking you a question. What comes to mind when I say the word new? In fact, if you were to answer this question, if you heard someone said new, fill in the blank, what would make you go, oh, yes? Okay, so now here's what I want you to do. If you're with somebody, you can just tell them what that would be. Or if you're brave, you can write that on the chat. Like, what would fill in that blank go if you heard, hey, someone said, hey, there's a new, you'd be like, get so excited in you. What would that be? So just take a moment and do that, and then I'll tell you what mine would be in a second. So I'm sure there's stuff that's coming up that you're writing in that you're surprised about. You didn't know that about that person. You're finding out all that. For me, it would be like either a new pair of jeans that I would like, or a new Matt Kearney album. That would be if I knew that. And here's what they know, but people who study brain and behavior tell us about this whole new thing, is that when you get something new, whatever it is that you like, new, a new car, a new sweater, there's a new song from your favorite artist, a new episode from the new season of the show you were watching that you loved, that actually gives us a rush, or it releases a chemical inside of us called dopamine. It's sort of the pleasure chemical, and it makes us feel good. It's why we like new. And it's kind of how we're wired. It's not a bad thing at all. It's things that we like, that whatever that fill in the blank is for you, that you get a rush of dopamine. Now, new is sort of depends what the new thing is, right? Like, full disclosure here, when I used to work in marketing, and a couple of years I was managing products that were, had been around forever, that there was nothing that changed about them. And so what we would do is we would make new packaging, and then we would put what we called the new flash on the packaging. And so it would make people, when they're walking by, hopefully, look at it and want to buy it. But you know how sometimes you look up close and it says new, and you're like, new what? And it says new look, same great taste. You're like, okay, that's not new, right? So it really depends what new is that's going to make you, give you that rush, that little dopamine release. Like, if it's something that you're not interested in, if you're not a car person, then a new car, you don't care. If you didn't know there was an old one and now there's a new one, it's something you're not interested in, or you said, well, nothing's wrong with the old one, I actually like the old one, new is not interesting to you. Now, here's the thing that I want to suggest to you, because we all do this. This is part of being humans. Is that the reason we crave, or that's something we're longing for in the new thing, is actually much deeper than the latest iPhone or a new piece of clothing or a new album. Is that actually what deep down we're longing for is the new me, the new version of me, the new version of you. That we know that actually inside of us, in here, not is all right, not is all well. There are some broken things. There are some old things that need to be made new. And there's this longing in us to actually become somebody new. But maybe because you don't really actually believe that's true, or because you don't think it's possible to actually be the new person, we settle for a new phone or a new sweater. But I want to submit to you that this journey, this longing we have that's in every one of us for the new, that actually is tied to the new person, is not something we made up. It's actually something Jesus said. It's actually something that was put in us from the beginning of time. It's something Jesus said. It was a promise of something new that Jesus actually made. And yet, for most of us, maybe some of you were never even aware that he did, and you didn't know this about Jesus. Maybe you don't know much about Jesus. You're still exploring that whole thing. Or maybe if you would, you're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What is it that Jesus promised us that was new? And in this season that we're in right now, it's the season of Lent. It's preparation for the 40 days leading up to Easter. Excuse me. And we wanted to, in this season, as we think about and look at the last words of Jesus, the final words, the words that he spoke before he was arrested and he was killed, as he was becoming aware of the final moments of his life, the words that he said to his closest friends. And one of the things that he said, if I could say this, maybe it was the most important thing he said to his disciples right before he died, was about something new. And they didn't quite get it at the time. Maybe we've heard it before. We didn't really understand all that was wrapped in it, or maybe you've never heard it before. But for all of us, for them and for the 2,000 years since then, and for everybody, included us today, these are maybe the most important words Jesus ever said. And so we're going to read for them. I'm going to read them for you together. Then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." This was the Jewish Passover meal. I'm going to tell you in a moment what that was about. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God." After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." Now, this was a meal. It's commonly referred to as the Last Supper, but it was part of the Passover celebration that Jews engaged in every year, and I'm going to explain in a few moments what that was. But it's something significant here where Jesus says, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." Now, I know, I kind of had this impression of Jesus growing up. Maybe it was from old paintings or whatever, like Jesus, very somber, silent, subdued, very quiet. But I don't think that's true at all. And certainly when he's saying this, think about this, picture this when he's saying, "I've eagerly desired to eat this with you." In other words, he's with his closest friends, okay? These are people that had become his closest friends. And he knows he's going to die. And so these are really precious moments. They don't know what's going to happen, but he knows. And he gathers them together in this room that he prepares, and he says, "Guys, I have really wanted to eat this meal with you. This is something I have been looking forward to and thinking about, and this is really important to me and significant to me." And the reason is because he's going to announce something to them that is really important that they need to know. And I don't know if you caught it, the new thing he said. New covenant. New covenant. Anyone getting a dopamine rush right now? No, right? Partly because covenant is a word we don't use very often in our day-to-day language. It sort of sounds like old language. We don't actually know kind of what it means. And to be honest, the disciples would have been trying to piece together as they were listening, as Jesus is leaning forward saying, guys, I have looked forward to this meal. There's something I want to tell you that's really important, this new covenant. But for us, and even if you've read it before, you've never heard it, it just kind of escapes us. And so we need to actually understand and say, if these were, Jesus was announcing something new in the final hours of his life in the context of a meal with his closest friends that he said, I have eagerly desired to eat this meal with you. We actually need to understand what is this new thing, because in this is the new that, if I could submit to you, all of us are actually looking for. This word covenant is maybe best understood as promise, and I put these letters DTR. This is not a theological term. Okay, this means define the relationship. Okay, so when I was like a teenager or a young adult, and if you were kind of interested in this girl and and maybe you've talked a little bit, or your friends, or maybe you've hung out a little bit, maybe it wasn't a date, you're not really sure, and you're in this sort of thing where you're like, what's going on in this relationship? You knew like a DTR was coming, right? A talk where you're going to define the relationship. Now, listen, some of you teenagers, this may be the best thing you heard to this. Like if you just take this, maybe this is all you need from today. That sometimes you need one of these DTRs, and basically what it meant was, hey, like, what are we? Now. Often I was on the wrong end of those DTRs where it's like, oh, you thought this was a thing. No, it's not a thing. We're just friends. But whatever the talk was, it was about defining the relationship. What is this relationship about? And actually, covenant, if I can say that, is one of those words. What is this relationship about? And so Jesus, in a sense, was saying that there was this new covenant, this new way of describing his relationship with his friends, and in fact, God's relationship with his people. It was the most significant DTR the world has ever known. Now, implicit in this whole idea of new covenant is that there was an old covenant, and that's part of the problem for us too. It's like, well, if I don't know what the old thing was, what is the new thing? How are they different? Why does that even matter? And so I want to actually, if you'll let me, for a few moments this morning, just jump back to what this old covenant was. Now, some of this may be familiar to some of you this may be totally new, but I want you to stay with me, because as we understand what the old thing was, it helps us understand what the new thing is, and as I said, it helps us realize why, wait, this changes everything for me. So the old covenant, in a sense, began, there was kind of three parts that I'm going to maybe oversimplify it for this morning for the sake of time, but it begins with God rescuing his people from slavery. And there was a backstory kind of before this, but we're kind of jumping forward to the children of Israel, the nation of Israel that had been in Egypt for 400 years, and well, more than that, but for 400 years they had become slaves. And they were under the rule of the Pharaoh. So it was the head of that nation who had enslaved them. And so these were generational slaves. In other words, for 400 years, your parents' parents, and your parents' parents were slaves. And that was where they were in. And they cried out to God for help. And so in the early story from the book of Exodus, which means exit, which is about the rescue, God comes through the person Moses and is going to rescue his people from slavery. Now, the problem is that as Moses was saying, hey, I'm going to lead these people out of Egypt, comes to Pharaoh and says, hey, we're leaving. Pharaoh wasn't down with the idea. And so he resisted and said, no, you belong to me. You're my property. I'm not letting you go. And it starts this whole battle between God basically trying to pry the fingers of Pharaoh off of his people and get them out of slavery. And if you know the story or not, it basically comes down to a battle between God and the gods of Egypt. And there's these things that happen because each time he says, Pharaoh, let the people go. And Pharaoh says, no, I'm not going to do that. And so God, says, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And at one point, the Nile, which is the river that ran through Egypt, turns to blood. All the fish in it die. At one point, there's like frogs that come upon the land. Another time, there's like gnats, flies, darkness. And if you read it, it's basically this kind of battle between God saying, let my people go, and Pharaoh saying, no, I'm not going to. And so the battle kind of escalates. But if you read it, it's actually, there's something interesting about it. All of the plagues that came upon them were tied to the gods of Egypt. In a sense, actually, Pharaoh himself, and every Pharaoh, whoever it was considered the god of Egypt, and sort of the, not just the ruler, but the god. They worshiped him. But then they actually had over 2,000 gods. And all of the plagues in some way were tied to the gods. So one of their goddesses, Heket, had the head of a frog. And so the plague of frogs is like, oh, there was this, it was linked, especially for the Egyptians in their mind, to like, this was the god of frogs. And now all these frogs are coming on the land. The Nile was considered holy because it sort of brought life to them. And so they worshiped the Nile. So the Nile turning to blood was like this other thing about a battle with their gods. They also had gods who were the head of flies. There was the sun god, Ra, was one famous god that they worshipped. And so darkness was a plague, like sort of fighting with that. And so there's this battle, cosmic battle between God and all of these other gods of Egypt. And ultimately, finally, the ruling god of Egypt, Pharaoh, says, okay, fine, get out, go. And so God rescues his people from Egypt by prying Pharaoh's fingers off through all of these miracles that Israel got to see. And so that was the beginning of their story as a people, where God said, I rescued you out of slavery. That was how this whole thing started, defining their relationship. Who am I? I am the one who rescues you. This is the first movement in that sort of DTR thing. And then as God brings them out, and you'll notice actually if you read all the way through the Old Testament, so many times it says, I'm the God who brought you out of Egypt. I'm the God who brought you out of Egypt. So this was a defining moment for their relationship with this God. He was their savior. He was the one who rescued you. He was the one who was more powerful than the God and the gods that had enslaved them, right? Because all these gods, these 2,000 gods, in a sense, they were all the ones who were oppressing the Israelite people, including Pharaoh, who was the leader of all of these gods as the leader of the nation. And so this was God saying, hey, I'm rescuing you from underneath those gods, and I am bringing you out. The story continues, and actually the next part of that Old Covenant is God brings them out of Egypt into the desert. And he says to them, I will be your God. You can trust me. Now, we are now in relationship together. And there's a whole bunch of things that happen in the book of Exodus. If you want to read it, it's a very interesting read that describes this whole thing. But basically, God appears to them, not in the flesh. They don't see him, but in like a cloud of fire, a cloud, like fire at night so they can see when they're walking, a cloud during the day that's so visible leading them, but sometimes a cloud that kind of descends on a mountain and there's thunder and lightning. And so basically the greatness, the bigness of God, is so evident to them. And he says to them, I will be your God and you will be my people. But it was one of those things when you read it, they're like, oh my gosh, like you are, oh my God, like there's no one like you. We're really glad you're on our side. Like it was this kind of, there was a fear, but, in a good sense, like overwhelmed at who this God was, that this God who rescued them, who proved that he was more powerful than the gods that were enslaving them, had now become their God. And he said, I'm going to be with you, and you're going to be my people. And that was really the second movement of this covenant, this promise. And then thirdly, as they are out in the desert, he gives them the laws. And maybe you're familiar with that old school movie, The 10 Commandments, or even just the idea of the 10 Commandments, was these laws that God gave them, basically to say, hey, I've rescued you from slavery, I will be your God, and this is how you are supposed to live. In a sense, they were slaves for 400 years, so they had the only law they had was their masters. Whenever they told them, they worked all of the time. There was nothing else to do except work and sleep. And so now they've been brought out into this new life, and God's saying, okay, well, this is how you're supposed to live. And the 10 Commandments turned into 613. Actually say and that was the number of laws that they had. And there were laws to govern all kinds of things. And at first we can go like, oh, that's a lot of rules. But it was in a sense actually trying to help them figure out how to live as a people. Like, how do you treat each other? How do you treat your neighbor? What happens if your neighbor ruins some of your property? So there were laws around property. There were laws around money exchanges. There was laws around if you were sick. And then there was a whole bunch of laws to govern what if you didn't keep any of the laws? Like if you screwed up, if you made a mistake, if you sinned, how there was a whole bunch of laws to deal with that. And so the 10 laws turned into 613, partly because they're trying to figure out how to do this. Some of it is just, this is what human beings do. So if the law is, hey, keep the Sabbath day holy, don't do any work, someone's like, okay, well, what's work? Like, Can you bake bread? Can you make your bed? Some of you are like, can you not? You can't. Mom and Dad, I don't have to do this anymore on the Sabbath. Figuring out what we're not supposed to do. And it turned into these 613 laws. But this essentially was the guts of that old promise that defined the relationship. I'm the God who rescued you from Egypt. I will be your God. You're my people. And here's how you're supposed to live. Now, a part of this movement in the first thing when they were rescued from slavery was what became the Jewish Passover. And so on the night that they left Egypt, God said to them, hey, I'm going to be taking you out tonight. This is it. After this long battle of the leader of the Pharaoh refusing to let them go, God says, no, he's going to let you go. This is going to happen. And so you're going to eat this meal of unleavened bread, because it's got to be made quick without yeast, and you're going to kill a lamb and eat that, and this will be part of that marks this night that you were rescued from slavery. And you're going to do this now every year, and this is going to become, as it marks the entrance into your new year, this is going to become a new pattern in your life. And so for, the 1,500 years since that day, every year the Israelites would celebrate the Passover meal. And it would remind them of all of these things. It would remind them that they had become a people, that God had rescued them. And so they did the same thing. They ate the same food, and the lamb and the bread and everything was all part of that Passover meal. And so now that is that old covenant, and that is what the Jewish people knew. And it reminded them, okay, this is the relationship we have with God. And now Jesus, as he comes together with his disciples, it's at Passover time. It's when they celebrate this meal and all that it had meant. And so they're having the meal, and that wouldn't have been strange to them. But then Jesus leans forward and says, I have eagerly desired to eat this meal with you. Now, typically when somebody was doing a Passover meal, the host of the meal would say the script. And there was like a script that you said every year about what the bread meant and what the wine meant and what the herbs meant and all of this to retell the story so the people didn't forget the old covenant. Right? That's why you did. You retold it. Oh, this is who God is, and you belong to him, and he belongs to you, and this is how you're meant to live. And so the script was the same, and Jesus changes the script. Not because he didn't know it. He was a good Jewish boy, would have been raised in a home, would have had 30-something Passovers that he would have been a part of. And he says to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this meal with you before I suffer, before I go. And he takes the bread, and he says something else. He says, this meal that for 1,500 years had been about that, Jesus says, now it's about me. And he takes the bread and he breaks it. And he says, this is my body, which is broken for you. And then he takes the cup and he said, this is like my blood, which is spilled for you. It is a new covenant, a new promise. I am redefining the relationship. What that was about, now this is about me. And this is about you. And this is the new promise. Now, even still, as we think about that, we're like, well, what did that mean? What is the new promise, and why does that have anything to do with us? Like most of us here are not Jewish. Maybe you've never been in a Passover meal, and you think, okay, well, I don't know what that meant for them, but what does that have anything to do with me here and now, even today, in the place that I'm in, or my family, or whatever? What is this new covenant? Well, Jesus actually explains it, and then the disciples later on understood, and now we know exactly what he was meaning about the new covenant. And so we fast forward to today, and here is the new covenant. It means that you and I are rescued from slavery as well. Now you may say, well, what? Like, I'm not a slave. What does that mean? I'm not under the rule. Like, we're free. Okay, maybe some of you would describe your schoolwork or your work like being a slave. But honestly, right? That's not our reality as people who live in this country. You say, I know identification with this, but can I just pause for a second and say maybe this is more true about you and about me than we actually realize? I was reading, actually, the book of Exodus a couple of weeks ago, and I was reading, about these plagues that were coming and these sort of gods, realizing that these were all kind of Egyptian gods in some way, shape, or form that kind of went crazy on the people. And the one in particular that freaked me out was, I brought my little frog here. This frog actually is very famous in our office because we leave it in each other's offices in strange places. It's part of a joke we play. I know, we have a weird sense of humor. But anyways, this frog, it used to make a noise and everything. So I'm reading The Plague of the Frogs, and I don't know what it was about that, but like it basically says the frogs multiplied in the land and came up into their houses and was in their food and everything and on their beds. So I'm picturing this like nasty thing. This one's cute, but it's like gross. Oh, like frogs crawling on me. And then it says that they all died. And so there's all these frogs all over their house, and they're all dead now. And so they were like shoveling out piles of frogs and like heaping up all these dead frogs. And I was like, that is so disgusting, like gross. And I felt like God saying to me, can I tell you something? Like, you don't worship frogs or the Nile or the sun, but there are things in your life that you think you need more and more of. They are the things that you look to, that you go to feel better about yourself, that you think, if I could have this, this would satisfy me, this would give me security, this would give me hope, this would give me comfort, this would give me pleasure. He said, you don't think about them as gods, but that's what they are. And he made me think about, I was actually speaking at a conference that week, at a young adult conference. And it is a pretty big conference. It's like 1,500 young adults. And it's a big stage and lights and your face is up on these huge screens or whatever. And I thought about the fact that I was at that conference, and this is kind of funny. On the program of the conference so there was 4 main speakers that day, and I was one of them. And on the conference page, the book that you get, it listed the 3 speakers, then it said plus more. I was the plus more, like my name wasn't on it. It made me think of like when the Raptors, a few years ago, were in the conference finals. There was 4 teams left, and CBS Sports did this poll of like, who do you think's going to win the NBA championship? The Rockets, the Warriors, the Cavaliers, or other? And Canadians were like, how dare they call us other? There's only 4 teams. Like, you couldn't just, you used the same amount of writing to put other. Couldn't you just put the Raptors? And in that moment, I'm thinking like, okay, there's these 3 other speakers plus and more, which is, I guess that's me. And then when I went into the room and they were going to introduce me to come on the stage, the guy's like, who's a friend of mine, he's like, have you written a book or something? Like, all these guys have written books. They have book tables. Like, what have you done? What am I supposed to tell people you're doing? And we were laughing about it. But I have to tell you, I left there with this kind of little feeling of like, maybe I don't belong, or like I'm not, whatever, famous or whatever, or maybe I haven't really arrived as a pastor or whatever. Now, you could listen to that and go, that's weird, like who even cares? But this is the world I live in. And I felt like God saying to me, is that what you want? Like, do you want more of that in your life? What is it, recognition? Is it fame? Is it approval of other people? Is it a sense of knowing that somehow you're good enough, that you've made it, or that you didn't think you could, but now you could, and now whatever that means? Like, what is that about for you? And I felt like he's saying, you know what that's like? That's like those frogs. Like, you think that what you need is more of that. You need more affirmation. You need more approval. You need more recognition. He said, but if you got more and more of those things, or if you keep looking for more and more of those things, that stuff will invade your life like those frogs. It will crawl up into your house, your marriage, your family, your life, your psyche. It will be like deadness kind of all over you, whether you get it or not. And I thought, it was like this feeling going, oh God, I don't want that. He said, those things are all like, that there's all these false gods that promise whatever they're going to give us, whether it's security or significance or satisfaction. In many ways, some of the things that have been rocked in a season like this for us, whether it's your retirement plan or your studies and how well you've been doing, or your job or your title or your sense of well-being financially or your health or whatever, they're all good things, but there are things that ultimately we can look to and say, I need this. This is the thing that tells me I'm okay. This is the thing that gives me security. This is the thing that gives me significance. This is the thing that gives me satisfaction. I felt like God saying in this moment, those things can enslave you, whether you get them or not. You can strive, you can give your heart to them. And when they let you down, when they fail you, when you get them and they realize that's not enough, or when you can't get them and you try for more, it is so unsettling in you, you feel like you're coming apart. And some of us, even in this season, that's where the source of worry and panic comes from, because these are the things that we have counted on to give us a sense of stability and security. And God says, they will crawl up into your life and invade you, and in the end die. And they can affect your relationships. They can affect your psyche. They can affect affect your body. They can affect the way that you treat your spouse or your kids or whatever, your friends, or how you think about your schools or your job or whatever. They aren't enough for you. They're false gods. I felt like Jesus said to me, but you know what? If you got more of me, if you let me, if you pursued me, if you fixed your mind on me, if you got more and more of me into your life, you know what happens? You become the person you want to be. You're a better friend. You don't have the grip that money doesn't have that grip on you. You don't worry so much about what other people think about how you look or how you perform or whether you've succeeded. You're a better employee. You're a better spouse. You're a better parent because you get more of me. I don't destroy you. I'm not the one that you have to make sacrifices for to get. That's what you have to do with all these other gods. You have to make sacrifices to get them. I am the God, Jesus says, who has sacrificed myself for you. This is my body broken for you. This is my blood for you. I am the God that gives myself up for you. I don't demand payment from you. I thought, man, this is beautiful. This is the slavery I have been rescued from. Not the gods of Egypt, but these false gods, these things that are good, but that are not God, and ultimately cannot take the place of God in my life. And if I pursue them, all that happens is I become a slave to them. I live my whole life trying to get more of them, whereas Jesus is the one, as I live my whole life trying to get more of him, he actually frees me. He says, remember, new covenant, I am the one that has given myself up for you. That's the God I am. And then he also says, like, it's not just I've been rescued from slavery, but now I am a God that you know personally. You see, Israel's God, when they had that relationship with him, he was up on a mountain, and they were like, hey, we're really glad you're on our side, but if it's all the same to you, we'd rather not come too close, because they were afraid of him. They said to their leaders, you go meet with God. We're a bit too nervous for any of this. And here we see God, who actually is able to say, this is my body, this is my blood. I have come in the flesh. The new covenant is that we have a whole new personal relationship with God. Not private, right? We share it as a community. He was with his disciples, his friends, but it is personal. See, many of you came from religious backgrounds, or even maybe your Christian upbringing was this picture of God, high and holy and up there, or maybe a force or whatever, and like, okay, cosmically in charge of the universe and, weighing all the scales and all that stuff, but not close, not personal, not flesh and blood, not friend. And Jesus, in one of the other accounts of this meal that he's having with his disciples, he says, I call you friends. You are my friends. We are close. This is now a new relationship, God redefining the relationship that he has with his people. It is personal now. We have a personal relationship. And thirdly, heart change from the inside out. See, when Jesus said these words, new covenant, the disciples would have heard something that most of us wouldn't have known or remembered. That about 600 years earlier, one of God's leaders, a prophet named Jeremiah, said, or basically it was the voice of God saying, I am going to bring a new covenant. There's this old covenant, but I'm going to bring one. 600 years earlier, he said, I'm going to bring a new covenant. And he says in that, I will take the law, the tablets of stone, the 613 laws, and I will write it on their minds and I will put it on their hearts. Well, what did that mean? Why did that matter? Because here's the thing. Laws that come from the outside, the laws, the criminal code, the 10 Commandments, whatever it is, they are meant to change behavior. You need to conform your behavior to these rules, to these laws, whatever they are, whatever they were that you grew up with in your home or in your religion, or as I said, the government, the criminal code. These are the laws. They're meant to guide behavior so that people behave a certain way, certain things they do, certain things they don't do. But most often that law that comes from the outside is not able to change the heart. It doesn't get all the way into the heart, which is why Jesus comes to all of the good law keepers, the religious people, and he says, oh, you've heard it said, okay, don't murder. Good for you. You've never killed anyone. But have you ever been angry with a brother or sister? Have you ever called them an idiot to their face or under their breath? He said, that's like murder. It's hate. The law can conform your behavior so you don't do the bad things, but it doesn't change your heart. He's basically saying it only goes so far. Oh, you haven't committed adultery, haven't slept with another man's wife? Have you ever wanted to? Have you ever looked at a woman and thought things you shouldn't? He's like, yeah, that's the same thing. It's in your heart. He was trying to say to them, you have this law. It maybe have changed your behavior, but it hasn't changed you. And that's why God says, I'm going to give them a new covenant. I'm going to change them from the inside out. So Jesus comes to us and says, okay, this is the new you. This is the promise of the new you, right? Not just moral conformity, not just good behavior, bad behavior, but I am changing from the inside out through the Holy Spirit, not the law, but God, Jesus says, I'm going to give you my spirit, my presence on the inside of you that will change you from the inside out. So no matter what the law tells you to do, whatever, that's not the most important thing. It's who you're becoming on the inside, and you begin to, it affects how you act. You end up treating people the way you're meant to treat them. You end up actually following the law, but not because somebody told you to, but because inside your heart has changed. It has now moved away from law, and it is about love. And that's why Jesus says the most important thing is love God and love each other. This is the new covenant. This is the new promise. This is the relationship redefined. I have rescued you from things that are good, but ultimately are not God. And if you treat them as gods, they will enslave you. And I have rescued you. And if you bring me into the center of your life, I'm the one that doesn't use you up and demand sacrifices from you. I have sacrificed myself for you. And now you can know me personally, a relationship with the living God, and that you become the person you were meant to be in this new promise, changed from the inside out. Now, friends, when we really contemplate that this is true, that this is actually the new promise that is made possible in Jesus through his life, his teaching, his death, and his resurrection, that our relationship with God has been redefined, that we are no longer slaves, that we are rescued from being enslaved to things that can't ultimately satisfy us or keep us safe or give us a sense of self and identity and security, but we are invited into a personal relationship with God who changes us from the inside out, that we become the new people, that I become the new me, the me I know I want to be, the deep down the person I was meant to be, that you can become the new you as Jesus changes you from the inside out. When we realize all of this, you know what happens? We do what Israel did when they were first rescued. It says when they came through and were finally rescued from Egypt, they wrote a song. They sang. That's what they did. And that's why we actually sing all the time. That's why we're encouraging you, if you're watching, from your couch, if you're on your own or you're with other people, and it may feel weird to sing, because when you realize this is what God has done for me, this is who God is, this is what it means that I can become the person that I was meant to be, we sing. And so Kurt's going to lead us in a song, maybe new for some of you. It's just words that are a reminder of who God is, this new relationship that we have with God, and that these are all the things that he has done for us, that God doesn't need things from us, but he wants things for us. This is one of those songs, and as I've listened to it, and Kurt's going to lead us in it, the words just have stayed with me, and our hope and prayer is that as you leave today, that these words stay with you, that they're a reminder of the new promise, the new relationship that you have with God because of what Jesus has done.
And so, church, we want to sing a song of response together. And this song that we're going to sing was released over this past month. And for us in our household, it's been on repeat. And many tears have been shed while listening to it, as it reminds us of God's promises, even in tough times. And so, if you allow me, I'd love to sing it over you and your household this morning. And once you get the hang of it, feel free to join in with me. Let's sing this together. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The face towards you and give you peace. Pretty simple. Why don't we join together and sing? The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Let's all agree together, church, as we sing Amen. And Amen. 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 Lord bless you. Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen. 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 We sing Amen. Amen. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and your children and your children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming, in your going, in your weeping, in rejoicing. He is for you, 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 he is for you. Blessing over our families one more time, over our church. Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen.
Amen. Well, before we dismiss you today, just wanted to give you a couple of things to keep in mind, and then and give you a blessing before I leave. First is just to come back to if you have kids or you're connected, you got nieces and nephews or grandkids or whatever around, you can go to upperroom.ca. You can grab the lesson from today. And they're kind of tracking with us for the next few weeks. And then our hope is that on April 19th, weekend after Easter, that there'll be kind of a separate service for the kids if they want it. It won't be a live stream, but we're trying to figure that out anyways. But feedback from parents is always good. You can let Melissa know about that, but that's there for you. Secondly, right now, for the foreseeable future, we're live streaming our Sunday services. That's going to be at 10 a.m., and that includes a service on Good Friday at 10 a.m. and also on Easter Sunday. And so just wanted to begin to remind you about that. And there are people in your life, who Easter is a time and a season where they maybe, are interested in checking out church, or it's been a part of their past, but really isn't a part of their present. And so, but they're open to that. And I would say there's lots of us right now, right, who are, whether faith is a part of your life or not, who are kind of looking to God in some way. And so Easter weekend could be a fantastic time for you to actually bring some friends and family, neighbors, or whatever online. It's actually great. They can check out church in their underwear, this is a really kind of low-risk opportunity for people. And actually, when you log on next week to our live stream on Sunday morning, that we're actually launching our new brand, name changing and all that stuff. If you weren't familiar with that, that's happening next week. So when you log on Sunday morning, it'll actually be a new site. You don't need to worry. You can just go to upperroom.ca. It'll direct you. But then you can forward the link over to people after next weekend to say, hey, come to Easter service. Check it out. Good Friday, Easter Sunday. The last thing is, if you need any support or prayer at this time, even though we can't be physically present with you, which you have to know is driving us crazy as pastors. We love being with you, being able to hug it out with you, all that stuff. But if you need support, or people who do, whether that's financial support from our Compassion Fund or just prayer, someone to pray with you over the phone or over FaceTime, or somebody in your life that would appreciate prayer. Of course, you can pray with them, but sometimes people want like a priest or whatever. Well, we're not priests, but we're happy to pray with you and your friends and things like that. And so if you're in the Bolton area, Bolton congregation, people like that, you can connect with Pastor Tony. If you're in King, with Melissa, and in Vaughan with myself. And so those are there for you. And if you're not sure who to contact, just email one of us and we all work together. So we will connect you with that. But as I close, I want to just reiterate the words of that song, which is called A Blessing. Maybe you'll go up and look it up online or whatever. It's called The Blessing. But it just says, in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing, he is with you and he is for you. There's a lot of things going on in our lives in the morning and the evening. Our coming and going has been affected, right? This is more like we're not going anywhere right now. But in that, whether you're going out to the store to get something and you're worried about something, that you will know in all these places, Jesus is with you. As you're going, some of you, to check in on relatives who are sick or elderly people that you're in your care, or as you're finding you have to go to the hospital, the doctor for something, that you would know he is with you and you're coming and you're going. When you wake up, or you go to bed at night and you've checked the news, I would encourage you to maybe just check it once a day, but whenever you do, that he's with you in that too, and he's speaking to you. And when you are finding the small, delightful things in this season and laughing together, he's with you. When you are weeping because you're worried, because you've lost something, because you've lost someone, that he is with you. And so would that words go with you as you go this morning. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we look forward to seeing you online next week. God bless.